Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to News from the Real World, where we talk about the top 10 comment-generating posts on the blog this week. My name is Parker. I'm a second-year stage and production management grad student.
My name is Grace. I'm a first-year costume design grad student.
I'm Evan. I'm a first-year scenic designer.
I'm Izzy. I'm a second-year scenic design grad.
I'm Hannah. I'm a third-year sound grad.
You got any Christmas music?
This is Christmas music.
Come on, everybody. Let's sing till Santa gets here. Santa's coming tonight. Santa's coming tonight. Santa's coming.
On that note, our first article of the evening is, Does Online Theater Really Need to Be Live? Written by Alice Seville on Exult magazine. Really, this article talks about the essence of liveness in online theater and how important that is. So is liveness and a sense of being in a room together important to make theater? Are these elements necessary in virtual theater? And if they're not, is it still, if they're absent, is it still theater if there's no element of liveness or being in a room together? A musical theater director, Adam Lenson, there's a quote from the article that I think summarizes this conflict pretty well. We're just giving people more excuses to argue that digital theater is just crap film, because let's be honest, if I'm filming and repeating something and editing something, but I'm doing it with $5,000 instead of 5 million, it's a crap film. So what's special? What's unique? Like, what are we fighting for? That quote, I mean, really is quite pessimistic, but it really summarizes the conflict, I think, that exists in all of us right now as we try and create theater as best we can, given the constraints we're dealing with. So live theater promises, and these are just kind of major points of the article. These are the agreements live theater as we know it, live online theater promises. Promises a sense of wonder that is a thing that is happening right now for live online theater. Promises the power of assembly, whether or not everyone is in the same place, there's still, and I loved this phrase, a spiritual togetherness of people who are coming together to watch a production, albeit virtual. It promises a necessary commitment from the audience member to show up at a specific time on a specific day to see a show, which is some structure that I believe has been lost slightly in this virtual world we live in now. Also the possibility of interactivity, display skills and live performance, and a major benefit is live online theater is employing actors and technicians for a longer period of time, which I think is a cool thing the article brings up as well. Another survey the article talks about, only 22% of people prefer live online theater, which is surprising that it's even that high. It's kind of my thought. But the overall argument here is what's the value of liveness in these online productions, and the degree in which we shoot for that live aspect is kind of what shapes all of the other decisions of the production in terms of design, budget, the gamut of decisions. It's really just talking about that conflict, I guess. What do you guys think?
I'll speak from like a musical theater standpoint, where currently as we have technology to do, it's impossible to do a musical live because you can't get the timing for everyone to sync up and sing and play on beat together. So those kind of aspects kind of force it off of either distanced productions like this or liveness in general. But I think I agree that, I mean, if you're editing and doing things in multiple takes and you have a budget of $5,000, not 5 million, you're just shooting an amateur film rather than an actual production.
I think it's also difficult because the group of us are theater tech people. So I'm sure Izzy and I would prefer to see shows that have sets to shows that don't. I'm sure Grace would prefer to see shows that have costumes where you can see the whole body to shows that don't. I so in that sense, I would rather have pre-recorded, professionally done theater with audiences in the room when it was recorded, because that takes me closer to the experience of theater that I am missing as a theater tech person than quote unquote Zoom theater.
I think that's pretty true for most disciplines. I know myself, if I'm going to listen to something, headphones are nice and I have nice headphones, but like if I can go into a theater and like play music and move air out of, speakers that are a couple $100 to a couple $1,000, they're going to sound a lot better and it's going to be a much better experience.
I think this is just one of those things we've been talking about all semester, like how to make good Zoom theater. And I think, we're still in the same place we were at the beginning of the semester. We don't know.
Something we've talked about in production meetings coming up with our own virtual shows is at the end of the night when the performers close their laptops, like you lose the space, you lose the ability to tech things, and that in itself is a huge thing to navigate. It's just there's so many aspects of trying to create something like we had it before with constraints that really don't allow for that.
Just go back to the articles we were talking about last March, April of like, should you do theater? Should you not do theater? And at that time we expected this to be somewhat settled by now. So it's like, now we have to go back to that drawing board and go, okay.
I remember in March arguing for, everyone should be producing what they want to produce. And I think it's great. And to express yourselves and that's the greatest possible thing. And now I'm questioning it a little bit more, I suppose, as it's gone on for longer.
Yeah, I think if we had found a way to do theater that was perfect, we would not still be having this conversation. I think having the conversation is all the evidence you need that there isn't an answer right now.
Right.
And it's interesting how much people care too about live versus pre-recorded, because like when it comes to technical aspects, I understand like it matters a ton on how you're going to produce it, if it's live or all pre-recorded or a combination of the two. But in terms of like people speaking about, is it theater? It just makes me laugh because I'm like, we wouldn't be having this conversation if not for the pandemic, because if you walked into a space and watched a screen, then it would be like going to a movie. So it wouldn't, like this conversation never been had before, but I feel like it doesn't matter to me if it's live or pre-recorded. And what makes it theater for me is like what Evan was saying, the finishings. And theater, normally it's filmed from further away and cinema is closer up. So it's like these small details that make the difference, and then these smaller nuances, and not the fact that it's happening live or not.
Yeah. I do buy some of the things that the author is saying about the difference of things being live, about things being able to go wrong, and an actor having an imperfect performance or a live reaction to something. I think those things are interesting, but
I have an interesting question. Oh, go for it.
I was going to say it could be pre-recorded with like a one shot. So there's still, because I feel like a lot of times the audience, or maybe it's just me, like I think a good piece of filmed theater, I'm not going to know whether or not it's live or filmed unless I see it multiple times.
I'm interested in your comment, Izzy, about if there wasn't a pandemic going on, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? And it wouldn't be an argument of whether or not this is theater. So I thought back, are you all familiar with like the cult Rocky Horror Picture Show type shows where it's like playing, but then there's still people costumed?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, to me, the first thing I can think of that starts to sort of play that line. And what would you define that as theater?
Yeah,
I think if there's actors, it's theater.
Yeah. I think
it's no different than having a production.
It's also additional too. There's something happening to the actors who are doing that is plus what's happening on screen. They're not just acting out the movie, even though they are mostly. They're also adding to it. And
like kind of going back to those like SAG-AFTRA arguments about what is live, what's a movie, what's theater, etc. I don't know. If a company says it's theater, like just let them say that it's theater, because like I'm not going to expect, this such and such theater company to start producing like feature films. So, I think that's sort of where we can draw, it's like our identities.
Yeah,
Just let them be what they are.
So arbitrary.
I like that because what it I think gets at is that theater becomes theater at the moment you present it as theater, right? Like the famous Peter Brook example of a person walking across a stage. I think he's wrong up until somebody says, we're doing a play. This is a play of a man walking across the stage. I think when you present it as theater, it's theater. I don't know why I'm suddenly fighting Peter Brook, but.
Well,
Mr. Peter Brook, if you'd like to join us.
We're going to have Helen Mirren on next week. So if you'd like to join. Well, anyways, to do theater or not to do theater, that is the question.
Is this your costume design for Ratatouille?
Ratatouille?
No, this is a Beanie Baby.
No, the picture. The
oh. No, it's not. I don't want to get sued by that designer. But anyways, relating it to the question of whether or not people should be doing theater or not, this article is called Land of the Bittersweet, COVID's Effect on Nutcracker. The Nutcracker, I don't know. Written by Corey Steig for the Dance Magazine on November 27th. And basically just breaks down the impact that the Nutcracker has on ballet companies around the country. So the biggest question is, can companies survive without the Nutcracker? And there are statistics that say that it brings in like an average of almost like half of the total performance revenue of ticket sales a year for a lot of companies. This was a specific survey on 24 member companies in the 2017-18 seasons. But that's still, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if, everyone's got that show that they're banking on. And obviously, COVID has had a big impact on even the most successful companies. New York City Ballet is also, I guess, we don't have any like hard data on like the effect of not doing or doing the Nutcracker, but the fact that they've already had to take out millions of dollars from its endowment just to like make up for canceling their season is not a good sign. There's a company, there's a company, the San Francisco Ballet, which claims that it has done the first, like they're the ones who did the very first Nutcracker, and they've been doing it since 1944. And they're like, we don't want to stop doing it. Like, we don't want to break through. But it's like, you have COVID, so you're going to figure that out. So it's kind of a sad article because it just talks about like all of these companies that are struggling just due to the pandemic. But it also talks about what different companies are doing to regarding the Nutcracker. A lot of places have just canceled it outright. But the Pacific Northwest Ballet has done an all digital pay-per-view season that includes the Nutcracker. And having grown up in Seattle, I did grow up seeing that production. So I think that's kind of special. And then the article kind of just talks to some dancers, and they kind of talk about the effect that it's had on them. I mean, a lot of them say that they started their careers doing the Nutcracker, whether you start off as a party guest and then you move on to like a snowflake, and then, until you create and establish a career with this company. And they say that doing the Nutcracker is also one of the most strenuous and intensive things they'll do in their career, because they're doing like 40 straight days of the Nutcracker. And a lot of them say while it may have sucked while they were doing it, they would give anything to be able to do that right now. So, and student comments, a lot of people were surprised that companies relied so heavily on the Nutcracker, but I don't know. I'm kind of surprised, but not surprised, because I feel like theater's equivalent is like Christmas Carol. Not that theater is raking in probably as much money as these massive ballet companies doing the Nutcracker in their like 1,000-seat houses. But yeah, I don't know. Some students are like, maybe it's time to start new traditions that don't rely on the Nutcracker, the Rat King.
Yeah.
There's a new Rat King in town, and his name is Remy.
I think it's interesting because ballet has found this way to maintain public interest in an art form that the public is disinterested in 11 months out of the year. And I think what I was thinking about was opera, which hasn't managed that, right? Like I think that opera has this problem of not having a Nutcracker equivalent for people to come to every year. And a lot of opera companies have started doing musicals that are not operas in order to try to reach middle-aged people instead of very old people. But it's a difficult world out there.
I think
Has anybody tried to do a digital Nutcracker?
You
Cursory
mean
Google search.
Like everyone on
like
Like
individually?
anyone in general,
like,
not just us five.
I don't know. I don't know what it would look like. But
Bunch of
there is
people
a company
dancing
that's trying to like
and-
re-choreograph the show so that it can be presented in a simpler, like more modern way that can tour in the future. They're kind of like repackaging it so that they can present it now, but then it might also have some life when things are somewhat normal and we resume.
that sounded like it would still involve dancers in space together.
Yeah. And I think, and again, it's like, honestly, right now, we only have like a handful of options, right? To like really do what we consider performing or theater. And it's creating bubbles and doing that. It's everyone doing it on their Zoom screens, or it's like doing the bubble thing and like pre-recording, and then just posting.
The bubble thing's proven to work, though.
It's expensive though, I guess. It's a lot of work.
because I do think that there is like a tradition with the Nutcracker, not just for the performers, but for families and individuals who like, they'll have it be part of their holiday tradition. So every year they go to see the Nutcracker. So if there was a online format that even if the tickets were expensive, I think they could make a lot of money on it. But you also have to recognize like they'd have to change all of the choreography, or they'd have to do a bubble and spend all the money on it. And they would have had to start doing that months ago.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of pro shot versions of it from various companies around the world, but it makes me like wonder, especially recently, like what kind of archival footage exists among just like the companies across the country and what they can do with that, or I guess what they're legally allowed to do with it. Because I know that like where I worked, we took there were multiple archival recordings during the run of the show. And while they may not be great, it's still like, I don't know. I'm wondering how theaters can maybe repackage those as a way for people to enjoy theater the way we were able to before.
Oh, I think that's what if I was going to have a Nutcracker experience this Christmas, and I don't expect that I will, I think I would rather, like we were talking about before, watch a version of it that was filmed on a stage with the full ballet company with sets and costumes. But there are some problems with that, as the next article brings up. How's that for a segue?
That was great. Really.
Thank you. So this article is called Context Over Cancel Culture, What Companies Can Do with Problematic Nutcracker Footage. It's written by Phil Chan for Dance Magazine. So as he writes, a lot of ballet companies are bringing up old archival recordings of the Nutcracker to offer this year. But there's a section of the Nutcracker, and I had to look this up because the article sort of writes around this, sort of acts like we all know about this, because I guess it's for Dance Magazine. I had to look up the issue with Nutcracker. But in the second act, there's this section where they're in the land of the sweets, and people from various cultures present local things to Clara and the Nutcracker. So it's like Arabians, they present chocolate or coffee or something. And then there's Chinese people who present tea. So generally, what ballet companies have done with that is have white actors in yellowface doing these sort of stereotypical, over-exaggerated gestures and dances that aren't based in any historical fact or tradition. And the author of this article, Phil Chan, is the co-founder of a group called Final Bow for Yellowface, which, quote, works to improve how we represent Asians on the ballet stage. And he recommends 3 things for opera companies that, or ballet companies rather, that are thinking of presenting Nutcracker in archival recording this year. He says, acknowledge that it's problematic, encourage conversation about it, and demonstrate how you are doing better since then or in the future going forward. And he says it would be irresponsible to present it as it is without any conversation about it. There's a quote that I really like from his bullet list of the things that he recommends. He writes, the second act of the Nutcracker is a great opportunity to discuss the many issues that ballet companies face when trying to keep tradition alive while expanding beyond an exclusively Eurocentric point of view. And I think that's it. I think that a lot of ballet companies are stuck between the tradition of how things have always been done and living in the modern era.
I stage managed a production of a ballet Nutcracker in a rural city, and firsthand witnessed exactly what you've just talked about, Evan. And even in the rehearsal process, it gets problematic, referring to the numbers in a problematic way, and I think this conversation is incredibly important, and I'm glad that it's starting, and I look back on that time as a young stage manager and think about the things that I could have done differently.
I think it's really fascinating how problematic, and I don't know as much about ballet, but I know that opera is historically just super racist and problematic, and it still is today. The Met is still doing Yellowface as of this, the last time they could perform, right? And it's so crazy that we've had this huge movement with We See You White American Theater of theater companies being called out in Broadway shows and stuff, but knowing that right down the street at the Met or something, which is I feel is so much like theater, yet somehow has so much distance from what we do. I mean, how many of us can say that we go see opera regularly? It's I cannot. I've never seen an opera in person, I think. So yeah, it's really hard to picture how those conversations are going behind closed doors, in the rehearsal process or in those early meetings about just letting it be completely okay that they're going to do, Madame Butterfly with all white it's just kind of weird. And yeah, I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that.
One of the things that I thought was funky about this article is that the author of it treats the understanding that Yellowface is bad as a thing that came about in the past 4 years or something, but if it's a post-Hamilton conversation. He doesn't explicitly call it Hamilton, but the tone of the article is theaters may be digging out their archival productions of Nutcracker from 4 years ago, but times have changed. And it's oh, since 4 years ago?
It's always been.
Right.
Right. Tears,
I think there's been an understanding that Yellowface is bad for a long time.
I do appreciate, though, with his steps for what they're encouraging theaters to do, or performances to do. I like the part of addressing it and what are you doing to change, because something, and I know not every theater can do this, especially it's a case by case, how harmful could it potentially be, but not necessarily just removing those things from the story and instead redoing them or making them in a way that it's not offensive, or a way that it's educational but not doing any harm to people, because I don't think we should just erase that part from history, because it's also important to see where we've come from and the tradition, and how you can still tell the same story in a way that's not harming people. And so I think that's a good way to approach it. And how are you doing better? How are you educating people so that they're not taking the wrong things away from what is happening? That's something we kind of talked about in a lot of my ART courses.
Yeah,
but it's also
taking their kids to this is the problem you end up with opera and with Shakespeare and all these, and even some older musicals at this point, is the people who are taking their kids to see the Nutcracker want it to be the same Nutcracker they saw when they were 8, and when I was in Chicago, they ran into this problem because the Joffrey Ballet in Chicago had been running the same, sets and costumes for the Nutcracker for decades, and they retired them. And they said, we're premiering a new version of the Nutcracker, which is centered around the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, which is right after when the first production of Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker premiered. And it tells a real Chicago story, all new sets, all new costumes, kind of a new story, and people hated it, you know? So how do we let people know that it's okay for things that were old and difficult, problematic, bad even, to change?
Yeah, you know what I was, and like this is an idea that like just came into my mind as we're talking about how do we not erase the history of it, but acknowledge it, you know? And I was like thinking, you know, like you were saying, like they bring all the gifts in people from different cultures, and it's like surely ballet or dance exists in those worlds, right? Or like, and I, you know, and I was thinking about, I can't remember the name of the company, but I saw like a ballet of Raise the Red Lantern, and I think it was by like the Chinese ballet. I mean, that could be very generic, but um, clearly, like people are doing ballet in other countries. How can you incorporate? Maybe it's like maybe clothing that maybe they traditionally wear for ballet, or like certain styles. You know, I'm not too in tune to different, you know, choreography just within ballet, but I know that there's like a lot of other possibilities that can, I don't know, maybe like educate more than just show some sort of romanticized, exoticized version of these other non-Western cultures.
Yeah, and that kind of bleeds into our next article talking about opportunities for artists of color. It's titled New Theater Producers of Color Group Sets Mentorship Program. It's by Greg Evans, written on December 1st. And it's going over TPOC, the Theater Producers of Color. And this article is super positive and great and exciting. It's a newly formed organization, and they're announcing their first educational program to support and mentor the next generation of BIPOC producers. And it's going to be a 10-week limited space program that is tuition free, which is amazing. And it's going to have a lot of different courses like Producing 101, guest speakers from top Broadway producers, fundamentals of commercial producing, security rights, marketing, advertising, development paths, financing, budgeting, and more. And it's starting off 2021 at the end of January. And I put this quote in here that's it says, oftentimes the opportunities for learning how to become a commercial producer are inaccessible and out of reach. And that was said by the TPOC founder, Miranda Go, in a statement. And she continued on, we've observed many barriers keeping BIPOC out of commercial producing, and TPOC strives to break these down and make producing more accessible for a variety of voices. By making all of our programs free, we are allowing any BIPOC, regardless of background, level of education, training, or previous accomplishments, to join us. And this is one of the first things I've seen come out of, not that it necessarily came out of We See a White American Theater, but after the submission of White American Theater, the statement, I feel like this is exactly what is being called for in that. And it's not being run by white theater, I acknowledge that. But it's exciting that there's actually active change happening to educate and give opportunities that have been lacking.
And I think on this podcast as well, of like this kind of money barrier and class barrier that I mean is inherently systematically racist, but it's nice to see like people in these positions of power and wealth reaching back to the rest of the community to pull them up along with them. And
to me, it's exciting to see that it's starting at the top of the pyramid, for like, or the top of the food chain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The producers are really the people that are setting these standards in the industry. So it's very exciting that that's where this change is being focused in this article.
Yeah, I feel like there's been a shift to how can we more productively change things instead of just like necessarily demand, you know, instead of like little people demanding change. And I've seen that a lot with like casting directors as well. Because there was some like article I was reading where like the casting directors, like the very, very small percentage of them in this industry, in the world or industry or whatever, account for like a huge percentage of the people that we see in media or on stage. And so how can we widen our lens, you know, in ways that we can see more immediate change versus just like saying that we support it, right?
Right.
And I'm glad it's happening now because I know people are getting to work more and more as like things get more flexible. I don't know they get more safe, but things are being more flexible. But this is the best time to do it because these producers, like, you know, before the pandemic, everybody would speak very differently about their career and being caught up in like the grind of it and never really taking the time to slow down and reassess and prioritize your life. And so I'm excited that they're starting it off with the new year and they're going to have access to people who would normally be booked a year in advance, you know? So I think it's a positive outcome of like slowing down and thinking through how we're educating people and the opportunities they have.
Yeah, something that I feel like could really have, it is something that I feel like could really have good impacts on the industry as a whole. I hope it does.
Mm.
Even as a mindset.
The next article talks a lot about the same issues from the perspective of the director of a new Bob Marley musical in the UK.
I truly read half of this article thinking it was about Jacob Marley.
The title of the article is called Director of Bob Marley Musical, Skeptical About UK Theatre's Progress on Diversity. Clint Dyer fears industry efforts may not include recognition and compensation for the past. This is a photo of the director. It was a good article to read. I think he highlights that a lot of the change he's seeing is coming from a place of guilt, and he's skeptical on whether or not it will last. You know, and I think that's somewhat, you know, it's a strong thing to say, and I think it's a really important thing to say. You know, I think we have to really look at the motivation behind the changes. And I think we have to look at how long these changes will last, you know, and prioritize making them last and making them not about, you know, sacrificing or not about remedying my guilt, but about genuinely having a positive effect on the industry. And I think that's a lot of what he's talking about in this article. Dyer, this is a quote from the article, Dyer recalls being contacted by Cook, the previous director, and the former artistic director of Royal Court, who had been involved in the show's development. He just laid the most beautiful golden egg at my door, said Dyer. As a Black Brit of Jamaican heritage, there haven't been enough pieces of work where I've been allowed to really use my skill set and my capability and my knowledge. It actually makes sense of everything I am. It is literally putting all the parts together. And then he goes on to say, I find that Marley does the same thing. There is survival information in his music. It is great to dance to, but it also teaches you something, and you will remember it no matter who you are. I think the musical is great. It's perfect for this time, and I had no idea it was a thing that was even happening, and I'm very excited about Get Up, Stand Up, the musical now. So ultimately, I think it ends on a positive note. It's just a healthy skepticism about the change that we're seeing.
Don't think he's wrong either.
I don't either.
I kind of like read a little bit like an Onion article.
It's
like, director skeptical of theater's progress on diversity.
Fairly to the point.
Yeah. We just have to hope it's not that it's a trend that lasts, same as the last one.
I guess we can switch over to the bad part of an unhappy reminiscence of Broadway and musicals, going into how the Spider-Man musical became a theatrical disaster. This is written by Nicholas Barber for BBC. It reminisces with the playwright who wrote the 2010 musical Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, and the horrendous, just catastrophe riddled process that it was to get it to stage. Talking about the sheer power of stardom it had in its creative team with Julie Taymor and U2's Bono writing the music, and how it was a picture perfect case of Murphy's Law in action, where they couldn't get rights. The initial producer had a fatal stroke. There were technical snags and bugs. and my favorite comment about a mishap that happened in the middle of a show where the Spider-Man character was stuck 7 feet above the first 2 rows in the air, hanging on a cable because he's supposed to swing out into the audience, where he goes, one of the crew members fetched a stick to prod him with, but that didn't help. It was like a live Spider-Man piñata.
I want to know how big
And-
that stick was. Were they standing in the balcony?
It was the first 2 rows, so he must have been standing on the seats, or is it on
Or
the
on the
stage
stage or something? Must
I'm
have
just
been-
picturing like a push broom. He's like, all right, I'm gonna flip it, and you.
Right, but it must have been so much longer than a push broom if it reached him above the audience. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Imagine the stage manager being like, "Please hold."
Were the
All I can
everyone
remember,
can see what's going on.
We're going anywhere,
I
Spider-Man.
remember hearing about the Spider-Man musical and the atrocity. I didn't realize it ran for 2.5 years, but
Most of that time was previews.
most of that time was previews. It went through like 2 iterations, but like the original director did not care about Spider-Man at all, and Bono doesn't give a shit about musicals, and like there's a quote from him talking about what he thought of them. Bono eventually dismissed nearly all the songs that they gave him to be like, hey, here's musical theater, this is what it sounds like, as mawkish, dopey, or just pants, which is such a great British way of saying something. But all the songs he wrote turned out to sound like vaguely angst-ridden minor key U2 B-sides, which is another beautiful quote from this article.
Wow.
So Glenn Berger, who is the person being interviewed for this article, who wrote the book of the original Spider-Man musical and then has co-writing credit for the final product, wrote a book called Song of Spider-Man about his experience. Have you read it? I see you nodding.
I haven't read it, but they mentioned it in the article.
I've read it.
I've read parts of it.
It's so good. I cannot recommend it more highly to anyone. When I bought it, I got it on Amazon for like $2. And it's the tension in the section of the book where they're in tech is so real, because he will describe some terrible thing that's happening during tech, and he'll be like, at that point we were getting through 6 seconds of the show a day on tech. And he's just
Were the spiders that were doing like the aerial work actors who were trained to do this, or
I
really?
feel
Because
like
I'm
this would have
thinking
been much better as a Cirque du Soleil than a.
that's
Well,
what I was
that's
going
the
to say.
thing,
Cirque du
is near the
Soleil would
end
do this
of-
flawlessly.
near the end of the Broadway run, they mounted a circus production, and this is what's funny about the book is that when he wrote, it seems like when he wrote the first draft of the book, that was still running. So the tone of the end of the book is sort of like, they said we'd fail, but this circus version of it is up and it's running and successful. And then he like quickly has to addend it at the end and be like, oh, and it closed also.
I want to see Disney/Marvel try their hand at this, because I understand there were a lot of like outside factors that contributed to just the difficulty of this process. But again, Cirque could have done this show no issue, and it probably would have been like had a residency in Vegas for years.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, not every musical project has to be a Broadway musical.
Yeah, but we wouldn't have gotten the wonderful South Park episode about Broadway, where one of the characters ends up like putting on a Spider-Man costume to try to like cancel a theater that like a show that's happening, and like ends up killing somebody in the process of like the middle of the show and the disaster that happens.
I mean, that show was just a Spider-Man Charles Arc. I mean, that was just a disaster, like consistently. Like it never stopped being like having trouble, right? Like the technical issues alone, and like that. I mean, not to be like dark about it, but like someone died working on the show, right? And
I don't think anyone officially died.
I
Someone
know
died?
that somebody died.
yeah, I
They
heard
didn't
somebody
mention it
died.
in
I don't
the
think. I think it was
article?
an
can
actor or
Google it.
something.
there's a famous incident where a stunt actor, in this video of where a stunt actor like breaks his spine live on stage or below the stage.
In the article, they mentioned somebody like broke their toe and another person broke both their wrists. But I had always heard that, somebody died during that production.
Are you both Googling it? I see people looking up.
Yeah,
I Googled it. The only thing that's coming up is the producer.
Right.
Okay, well, I guess technically
maybe like the legacy lives on. Like the more you tell the story of Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, like the bigger it gets and the more injured people there are.
Yeah.
South Park didn't help.
Well, I guess related to who could have done it better, let's talk about Cirque du Soleil. This next article is titled "Reflecting on Zumanity: So much more than a Las Vegas show," and it is written by Brock Radke on November 25th. So we talked about this a couple of podcasts ago, but Zumanity officially announced that it is closing permanently, which kind of came as a shock to some of the performers involved, just because they were sort of put on like a furlough or sort of like a week by week, or oh, we don't know yet, and then they kind of just announced that that was it, they were over. And the article really just kind of talks about like the legacy of Zumanity, and I've never seen it and I don't know a lot about it other than like what I've read in this article, but the article says that it is kind of groundbreaking in its own way because of sort of its like themes around sensuality, romance, eroticism. And so it was kind of controversial when it opened in 2003. The article says that one of its best known acts features two men who are engaged in like a very like intense battle in like a very like ballet like way. And then it ends with them kissing. And apparently, like when the show first opened, you would have people who just like get up and leave. And they interview one of the performers, and the performer says that like sort of like as time went on, like that just wasn't an issue. Like you were getting less and less of just people out of like, I don't know, anger or shock being like, I'm leaving. So yeah, and they also just talk about how it became like Zumanity became such a part of their lives because people do this for a long time, or like it's just and also like when you're in Vegas, it's not like it's gig life, like you're doing Zumanity and that's what you're doing. And yeah, it's a lot of like reflecting on the joy and the happiness of bringing all of these people from around the world together and creating this piece of art, and just the impact that it's had socially and also artistically for the audiences and the performers in Vegas. So,
Parker, can we bring back the article and admire the bisexual eye candy that opening picture is?
Yes, give me just a moment.
I think it's definitely a loss, but I mean, it sounds like they had a really healthy run.
It was 15 years, right? Or,
yeah,
no, 17 years because it opened in 2003.
A lot of Cirque shows do not play for even that long. So, I mean, I know it's a Las Vegas residency.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting because these shows, like, it's people plan trips around it. Like, I'm going to go to Vegas every year and I'm going to see the same show over and over again, because if you do get the opportunity to see a Cirque show, it's like jaw dropping. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I saw a Cirque show for the first time a couple months before the pandemic. Wow.
The muscles on those people.
It's insane.
Muscles.
Anyways,
it's a shame that okay. So the largest shame is, of course, like the loss to Las Vegas, to the performers involved. It sounds like a really interesting genre expanding kind of show. It's a shame that there's not a film of it as well.
I bet they have archival footage of it somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure there's so much pro shot stuff.
I also wonder if the show would have like closed next, in the line of Cirque shows.
Right.
Just because it sounds like when it was created, it was sort of edgy and like this is like an awakening erotic thing. And now we don't need that as much. Like we can push it further. We can be more upfront about it. So I wonder if it was like naturally on its way out. And so it was like this beautiful remembrance as we close down this show, but we're going to open up new ones, or if it was never, like if this was a complete tragedy that nobody saw coming.
Well, Izzy, I want my children to be able to see the Zumanity that I saw when I was 8 years old.
Well, and that's something that keeps coming up that makes me laugh, because I feel like most theater people don't have that desire to see the same thing over and over again. But we also have to recognize that that's a huge part of life for human beings that aren't theater goers, or like theater people, I guess, is they like the routine, the tradition, the knowing what to expect, not being shocked, but like appreciating things. So it's just kind of funny whenever it comes up in an article, because I can't really relate to that desire.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few shows in my life that if there was a remount of with the same cast and production team, I'd be like, I am booking a plane ticket. I'm going to be there, right? But you know, I think what makes theater special is that is rare when it happens.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think circ shows are sort of just a testament of like what happens when you integrate technology and you know, movement and sound and just like everything so seamlessly into a production. And I know that like circ is kind of, it's like different from like obviously like regional theaters, nonprofits, even Broadway. But you know, I think I've only seen one circ show ever, and it was in Vegas. I saw Caw, and it was because I went to school really close to Vegas, so we did like a field trip, and my mind was like blown. I was like, why aren't we doing this in theater? You know, like and I understand, I know why, but like the seats had the speakers in them, so you were totally like 360. You had the sound, and you know, like the floor comes up and they're all rigged up and they're like moving on the you know, and it's just like it's so dynamic and like it's again, it's like something that, you know, you're shocked and you're amazed when you see it the first time, but you want to see it again to like feel kind of that like high again of being like, that's amazing. And
Well,
I think that's something that circ is very, very good at doing.
Yeah, what I think it gets at, what I think makes it so successful is that the experience you have is so communal. Is that you like, we are all holding our breath for that guy right now. Like that shouldn't be possible. And I think he's gonna die, but I'm gonna watch, right? And I think that's what we want in theater. Like when theater is successful, it's when the audience forms a community, and the fact that we're not using the tools of circus spectacle more often, I think is a loss. And I understand that it's expensive, but when I saw the Pippin revival where they added in circus tricks, those are some great moments. Like I think you often have, in terms of musical theater structure, this is a diversion, but real quick, in musical theater structure,
I'm not the only one who can go on rants.
I know. Don't cut me. Briefly. Musical theater structure, traditionally, the first song at the top of Act 2 is useless. Like, it's just like, you might still be out smoking, nothing important is happening. And like, you kind of just have to get the whole audience back on the same page and like with the energy of the show. The top of Act 2 for Pippin, there's like a quick musical sting, and then there's a circus trick that is really like attention getting. Like, it's one of those things where someone is like balancing more and more things all at once. I forget the specifics, and they're like on a thing, they're balancing, they're carrying things, and it's, you know, and like I'm immediately, my attention is fully back on the stage. I don't, you know, remember the line at the bathroom or the concession stand or whatever. I'm back in the picture. So we need to find a way to do that. To segue into an next article, someone who seems to have found a way to do that is Dua Lipa. So this article says Dua Lipa's Studio 205 live stream draws a whopping 5 million plus views. So this is an article in Variety by Jem Oswald. The 5 million, which by Variety's count is a conservative estimate of the people who tuned in, is a record for a paid live stream. And Elton John, Kylie Minogue, and Miley Cyrus were all guests. The show had a low-tech vibe with no particular special effects, in keeping with the tone of her Future Nostalgia album, which the stream promoted. And there's a quote here from Mark Watson, the director of Live Now, who says, Studio 2054 shows that artists can create unique live events designed to experience at home that delight their fans and attract major sponsors. This is not easy, but we have proved if you get the creative format and marketing right, there is significant and growing consumer demand around the world for streamed live music events.
Where are all these NEETs who don't want to go to an actual concert but want to sit in front of their laptop?
I thought that's what I thought. So then, can't talk. That's what I thought was interesting, is that they really took the time to say, what is the difference between a concert experience that is about being with people and experiencing something, and an experience that is about watching something. And I think that's a key difference.
And I think there's a space for this after the pandemic as well, because like, if it's, I love live music from like a seated position, like a jazz club, you know, or like a nosebleed seat for a concert. But I'm short and I don't do well in like the mosh pit of a huge arena and the parking situation. So like, I don't go to huge concerts a lot, but I love the energy and the spectacle and the liveness of it. And so I would actually prefer for most concerts to go stream it from the comfort of my home. I can like make a pasta dish while I'm watching it and stuff. Like, I would really enjoy that long term. So I'm glad so many people are into it.
It's gonna save a lot of people's hearing too.
Yes.
Seriously.
And their noses and teeth from mosh pits. Just stop it. Listen to the music.
And I think it's going to introduce a lot more casual viewership too, right? Like, I don't know how everyone else is, but if I go to a concert, it has to be of a band where I know literally every song from every single album. Otherwise, I feel like an imposter. So that's like 2 bands. So I haven't been to a lot of concerts in my life. So, it would totally be awesome to like get to go to like, see an artist who I know a couple of her songs and I like them, and like I want to like feel their vibe and all this stuff without awkwardly just standing there with like a warm beer in your hand. Like, what do I do with my arms?
Everyone else's sweat.
Yeah.
And it was super affordable too. They had it available for a short time afterwards. It's not available anymore, but it was like it was in pounds. It was like under 10 pounds though.
Oh, wow.
I would do that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I would have done that.
Speaking of streaming content, next article is studios will continue to put movies on streaming in 2021. Written by Rebecca Rubin on December 1st. And it's talking about weird movie releases, specifically looking at Tenet, Wonder Woman, and Mulan since the pandemic has occurred, where Tenet had a regular movie release in theaters, Wonder Woman went onto HBO Max, and Mulan went onto Disney Plus with the infamous $30 charge on top of your monthly fee. And the article is talking about like, this won't end in 2020. No one is expecting it to end in 2020. And it's unrealistic to assume that the COVID crisis will not have long-term effects on movie release dates in theaters. And it is kind of throwing around different ideas and like the benefits and negative aspects of releasing HBO Max. And a couple of things were saying, I believe it was for Tenet, they released it. No, it was Wonder Woman. They released Wonder Woman on HBO Max for only like 2 weeks or something, then pulled it, and then they put it in theaters, is what they were saying in the article. So they were saying like, oh, you can have both, so people can still see it, but then they can see it in person, which I didn't really understand that. But it was going to be pulled until home release. And they were talking about doing this for Emma Stone's Cruella, which I'm very excited to see. They have Pinocchio and Peter Pan and Wendy. They're talking about those skipping the theater and going straight to Disney Plus debuts. And people are wondering, like, is it that going to be the new thing? Is that I have to pay extra money every time? But then the student comments are where this blog post really shines, because so Shazad points out that there's a difference between theaters being open and being accessible, and then also like the demand, just because it's technically safe. Are people who've been locked up in their houses going to want to go sit in a dark theater and pay a bunch of money to watch a movie? Like, that's a big question. Wearing a mask, like people next to you are like tossing popcorn in their mouth. You just have to trust that people got the vaccination. Like, it's a very stressful scenario. But then there's a lot of comments that are like, is Hollywood really at a crossroads though? Like, this was an issue before the pandemic. Streaming has always slightly threatened the theater going experience because home theaters are getting so advanced. And somebody said the article was somewhat disappointing because it's not saying a single new thing about how the pandemic is altering things. The industry has been dealing with this for several years now, and it's not anything new for them to contemplate if they're still making money compared to live entertainment companies. This seems to be a problem in the movie industry way before the pandemic and does not hold a light to the theater problems. But we say that reading them as theater people, but it was like an interesting article that kind of just felt like a toss aside, because for the consumer, if they're still able to afford to produce the movie, like I'm willing to wait 6 months for pretty much every movie. Like I'm okay with not seeing it right away unless it's something that like I have been waiting for and hoping for forever.
Right, but how many movies is that?
The last movie I saw in theaters was Incredibles 2 over 2 years ago.
I think the last one I saw was the last Star Wars episode.
Yeah,
I think same
I
here.
forgot about those. Oh God.
Well, and I think it just is a testament of like how kind of selfish in terms of like capitalism all of these companies are, because it's like you can afford to just put it on the streaming service. Like I just got HBO Max so I could watch more movies. Like and that's, it's like I can justify paying more for another streaming service if it means I get that much more content to be able to watch things and like TV shows and stuff like that. But like Disney Plus, and I'm probably exaggerating, but aren't they making like 70 new Star Wars shows or something? And it's
I
like,
don't think all of those are going to actually happen.
Yeah, this article was released before the Disney Plus slate came out yesterday. That was like 5 PowerPoint slides long, and a lot of those things seem to be things that already exist that are coming to Disney Plus for the first time. But there's a lot of new, uninventive stuff coming to Disney Plus.
Yeah.
like the Obi-Wan.
Right. There's a lot of
right?
spin-offs and recognizable things.
Yeah.
There's a thing called Baymax with an exclamation mark and Zootopia with a plus sign. And so I don't know.
I love
just like the home theater experience, in my opinion, is far superior. Like you can't like eat an entire meal at the movie theater, you can have whatever you want. You can have any alcohol you want at home. You can have hot chocolate at home.
You can go to the bathroom.
You can pause it. You go to the bathroom. And I know this might not be an everyone problem, but I've had to start bringing those like, what do you call them? Like earplugs that we have in the shop, like in my pocket to the movie theater, because it is so effing loud inside of a movie theater.
Yeah.
I just like am in pain watching it. I have to like prepare for the caveats of a theater.
The sound in movies has gotten really bad, where explosions and action scenes are way too loud and the dialogue is so quiet.
It's like if I can hear it from the other theater, it's too loud.
Right. I think that we will, hindsight would tell us that movie theaters were already a dying industry, and the pandemic was just ill-timed for them. I'm curious to see how this evolves, because I think no one knows what happens next. Because I think that there are people who will always want to go out and make an event out of seeing a movie. Yeah. But I think there'll be a lot less of it in the future.
I wonder if movie theaters will start to do things with companies that do weekly television shows and start putting those in theaters.
Oh.
Because I feel like
watch parties, right?
Yeah.
I feel like a lot more stories are more
I'd love that.
being pushed towards that, like Game of Thrones.
Or even like The Bachelor.
Well, I was even thinking like,
that'd be amazing.
The book into the movie kind of thing that has been huge for like the last 30 some odd years or what have you. I feel like a lot of times people get angry because you can't do so much in 2.5 hours in a movie. But if you take a book and you string it out over 12, 24 episode season, you can get so much more in depth with things. And I imagine people will, they won't, but like,
I like that you want to reinvent
$10 every
serialized
time.
short films from the beginning of the film era.
Yeah.
I agree that the $30 fee is a little steep, and the Pete Davidson movie came out. I can't remember the exact title of it right now, but
Staten Island?
Yes, came out the same way, early release on Prime for $30, and I got got that movie, and I ended up getting Mulan, which was a poor decision. I made it through 20 minutes of the film and turned it off. But going to a movie will cost you X number of dollars plus popcorn and whatnot, and then you only get to see that movie once. So I think that $30 to own access to like new movies like that is probably pretty. I mean, I see it as a huge threat to movie theaters. You know, I think there will be significantly less theaters.
Yeah.
And when there's not a pandemic, you can have 30 people over and have a watch party, or buy a projector and like project it in your backyard over the summer. Like, it's way more cost effective. It's just not cost effective versus free streaming for $7 a month or whatever.
Anna, I love your idea though of cashing in on Blockbuster TV, because there already are these things. People are like, I'm gonna live tweet the new episode of, I don't know what tip right now, but whatever the hip things are.
The Witcher.
Yeah, I'm gonna live tweet the new episode of the hip thing, and you, because that's the thing, is you're creating this communal experience out of sitting alone. Why not go? I mean, I think the problem is because they're shorter. Theaters would have to offer an afternoon somehow. Be like, we're playing the episode before and then we're playing it, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Or even things where it's like you pay $15 and you get access to, like, there's 8 different options, and you can like, oh, I want to watch these 3 episodes.
Right. Yeah.
Or even just like reviving kind of like the cult classic night. And it doesn't have to be so specific, like Rocky Horror or like The Room, but it could be like, I know that like people love like the Lord of the Ring nights, right? Where you can go to a theater and watch it. It's like, when's the last time you got to do that, you know?
Yeah.
Or in the Star Wars too. I think a lot of theaters were doing that when the first new episode of the trilogy came out. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to monetize nostalgia in the movie theater.
Speaking of monetizing and the greed of corporate shills, SAG-AFTRA.
That segue.
Sorry, not sorry. Health plan spark outrage. It stinks of dishonesty and cronyism. This is an article talking about the another straw in the camel's back of crappy things that has happened in 2020, where because of COVID-19, SAG-AFTRA has announced that its health plan will be eliminating coverage for almost 12,000 participants, including over 8,000 seniors, which is, horrible and terrible, and no one should ever lose their health coverage because, they lost their job. But, SAG-AFTRA is huge, and they have supposedly insane amounts of money. So I don't understand why these people on the board and its trustees and them aren't doing things to be like, no, we have to protect our members of this guild and make sure that they're okay and take care of them, because if we don't, we'll be in trouble. There's a class action lawsuit right now against them.
Sorry.
So there's a class action lawsuit about this going against SAG-AFTRA. So I hope that things change. But, we can put the communist hats on or the socialist hats on and be, socialized healthcare is not a bad thing.
I don't know why this immediately made me think of, I lost it. But I just don't know why healthcare is what's cut in a pandemic. Like, that's just absurd that's where the cut happens. Like, why? Like, it blows my mind that this is the decisions that people are making. Like, I remember I saw some video of AOC making dinner and like talking about the holdup with the COVID checks and COVID relief, right? And that video was just so beautiful to watch her just explain the ignorance and the backup that is happening, right? And it's the same thing that I see here. It's like these companies are making decisions about people's livelihood that are so absurd, but then in the next sentence we'll spend X number of absurd dollars on whatever, and it's, I don't know. Sorry.
SAG-AFTRA was spending all that money to make sure
the thing
that
is,
AEA was staying out of their business, and you could have saved that money and gave these people health care, or God forbid you don't make a profit for 6 months.
Right. Yeah, and to force someone like Ed Asner, who's involved in the lawsuit against them, to get involved in this lengthy legal battle over his health care. Like, the man was enough. We give him health care.
Yeah.
And there's just like no transparency. Like, I feel like if you're about to redo your contract to get rid of healthcare, like that needs to be like a living document. There needs to be note taking of how you came to the decision and like why you just absolutely could not cut the funds elsewhere. Like, I don't know the names of the companies, but I remember early on in the pandemic reading about like CEOs who were taking, you know, like a huge pay cut so that they could keep more people on and stuff. Like, that's the level that I expect from these people. So it's just crazy because cutting healthcare is literally the difference between life and death right now. Like, you're kind of leading people down the road of being in the hospital and dying.
Not to, like, share in the socialist hat. Well, yes, no, to explicitly share in the socialist hat. That's why it shouldn't be governed by corporations.
Healthcare should not be a for-profit industry.
Right. I mean,
insurance should not be a for-profit industry. It doesn't matter what insurance it is.
Right.
And reading this, you don't even get shocked. You read this and you're like, that sounds about right for what's going on right now. Like,
yeah.
Well, I think it's very funny. There's this idea that like us as average Americans are kind of expected to have 6 months or so of funds saved up so, you know, you can get by. But immediately when this happened, every single corporation started doing cuts like this, started asking for that money to get bailed out from the government. And we're talking like big, huge corporations.
What did I see somewhere? I saw some statistic. There's no basis for it, so it probably doesn't matter. But just over 50% of people can't afford a $500 emergency expense.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing, is that for a lot of people, a healthcare emergency is like the ticket to the poorhouse.
GoFundMe is now like the leading medical insurer.
That breaks my heart.
It's misstated, but it is like what 1/3 of all of the things on GoFundMe are for medical expenses, which is crazy. The broken
GoFundMe is the insurance for the people.
Hmm?
GoFundMe is the people's insurance,
but only for popular people.
The uninsured.
Only if your sob story is enough.
Right.
Competitive.
What a downer we're ending this on.
I know.
Parker, what are you doing?
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This has been News from the Real World. We will definitely see you next week with hopefully some more positive articles. Thank you all so much.